be good to go on Sunday. So I go, wonderful news. About an hour later, I get a text from Steve saying, I am not improving like I need to. Can you cover my class on Sunday? So that was Friday night. So I was hoping he might be a little bit better, but I hadn't heard anything from him this morning. But he did want me to continue in Timothy just because, this particular quarter is kind of winding down. And so I'm going to be in 1 Timothy chapter 4. Come thou on. To help for Steve. Thank y'all for that. So, but anyway, we'll be in 1 Timothy chapter 4 this morning because Steve wanted to kind of continue. Now, Steve's been out, because this makes a couple of times he's been out. Well, I actually have the next quarter studying Nehemiah, so there may be I told Steve, I said, if there needs to be some extension to where, you kind of get, finish up your thoughts, I said, I don't mind any of that. So he and I will kind of work through that as he would like. So I know I said chapter 4, but I want to go back one verse into chapter 3 of 1 Timothy, and it says this, and without controversy, great is the mystery of godliness. God was manifested in the flesh, justified in the Spirit, seen by angels, preached among the Gentiles, believed on in the world, received up in glory. So my first question this morning is, how important is it for one to believe verse 16? How important is it for one to believe verse 16 of chapter 3? Yeah.
Kind of answers all the questions.
Yeah. So, sometimes we talk about, how some people get very caught up in, well, I don't know everything there is to know, or don't know all the ins and outs, or, I can't even name the 12 apostles or whatever. And we get kind of sidetracked into the trivia stuff, like the questions you would ask at like a Bible Bowl or something like that. When as far as verse 16 goes, that's basically kind of the foundation of our faith here, is that, because as the Hebrew writer says, we've got to first believe that God is. I think I may have shared with you the story. Growing up, in Grundy County, I don't recall any time ever meeting across anybody in school or anything that really didn't kind of understand Jesus. And then I went to MTSU, and I not only meet people my age that don't believe in Jesus, but I meet both students my age and college professors that don't even believe in God. And that was a big hit for me. I was really not necessarily prepared for that. So again, kind of the first thing here, God was manifest in the flesh. That's Jesus. And then, of course, justified in the Spirit, seen by angels, preached among the Gentiles, believed on, and then, of course, received back. He not only died on the cross, but he was risen. He's went back to heaven, and then again, he is going to come back. So again, kind of a very succinct, foundational verse for Christianity, verse 16 of chapter 3. All right. So let's look at chapter 4. Now, there's kind of three parts of chapter 4, and I hope I have time to cover all of them, because the last verse is something I want to give some time to discuss. So, would someone like to read, again, 1 Timothy chapter 4, verses 1 through 5 for me, please?
Spirit clearly says that in latter times some will abandon the faith, follow deceiving spirits, things taught by demons. Such teachings come through liars, whose consciences have been seared as with a hot iron. They forbid people to marry, order them to abstain from certain things. God created to be received with thanksgiving those who believe and know the truth. For everything God created is good, nothing to be rejected. It is received with thanksgiving, that is consecrated by the word
So there's going to be this, some people use the word apostasy. There's going to be this, some people say falling away. Some people will say that there's going to be this group that is basically going to be contrary to what the gospel and to the original doctrine is. I feel like the terms here are a little unique in that, so what are these deceiving spirits, these doctrine of demons that's talked about in verse 1 here? What is that? What are those? Let's go with a simpler question. Let's go to verse 2. So, whatever these things are, basically it says they speak lies and hypocrisy, or speak, well, I can't think of the word you said, Al. Hypocritical lies. So what is that? That's something I think we can kind of wrap our head around. What is that? First of all, what's hypocrisy? What's a hypocrite? Jesus uses that word a lot.
Tells you to do something when they do it. Not to do things that they do it.
Yeah. It's basically, it's kind of go back to the phrase that we sometimes use, or you kind of heard your parents tell you, you got to practice what you preach. You know, that kind of thing. Or hypocrisy is kind of, you're doing just the opposite of that. You're saying something, but you're not doing it, or that you're doing something, but you're saying something the opposite. You know, Jesus really got on to people for saying that. So what is this practice that we're talking about here? That the people in this latter times, these are some of the things that's going to be done. And so what is that? Correct. Right.
Never became flesh.
Correct. Yeah. That's true. Yeah.
He was always a spirit.
Right. It wasn't. Mm-hmm. What kind of hypocritical lies are done today? Or are there done today? Is this something we need to be aware of? Yeah, that's a good example. Yeah, very good example. So we're dealing with that today. These people will tell us that well, if you look at how do I put it here? The definition, this is given by AI, if you ask AI. Hypocrisy is the practice of claiming to have moral standards or belief to which one's own behavior does not conform. So again, it's like, I'm this, I come to church, I come to worship, but yet outside, and you participate, you do things, you say all the right things, but yet your actions are clearly not what you are saying. That's hypocrisy. And so there's going to be a time, Paul is warning Timothy, there's going to be a time that this is happening. And he also says that they're going to have their own conscience seared with a hot iron. That's, I hate to say it, most people, even in my generation, have no idea what an iron is. More or less, for my grandmother, you basically put that iron on a stove. You put the heavy object, used to be a doorstop when it wasn't ironing. You know, you'd put it on that stove and it'd get so hot you wouldn't even dare touch it. But they're saying that they've had their conscience seared with this hot iron. So what's the significance of that statement Paul is making here? These people that are doing these hypocritical lies.
So much, it's seared, so they have no conscience.
Yeah.
Fine with whatever. Don't like it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's like, it's almost, it makes it like a permanent thing. You know, it's like, oh my goodness, and I've never done this, but you know, you have heard of some people that they'll touch something that's so hot that it'll basically take their fingerprints off their fingers. You know, and it's like, you know, they're not there anymore. Well, it's kind of like that with your conscience, is that there's so much been put on it, or you know, that belief is so much there that they're not going to believe anything else. In Lipscomb's commentary, he says, the man who cherishes some private or secret sin, which he thinks is petty and unimportant, is gradually hardening his heart and fitting himself for a total breakdown of his moral character that will develop itself in permanent open sinfulness and degradation. The conscience should be kept good and tender. The heart. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
I remember seeing Gone with the Wind, and the first time he said that word on the big screen, it was a huge scandal.
Right.
Well, you can't watch it.
No. That's true, yeah.
And we don't even notice it.
That's true. You know, I was actually speaking to, well, it was Nat, because he was talking about, you know, shows and stuff that, you know, there's just, you can't watch shows with Lily and so on, and same thing with us and Caden. And it was like, you know, I think we used the example Back to the Future, Michael J. Fox, you know, Christopher Lloyd and all that. And he like watched it, you know, one day a month or so ago, and I've even thought about watching it too, but what we discussed is actually has a lot of language in it that it's like we didn't even notice as a kid when we watched it before, but now as a parent, we don't want to expose necessarily our kids to that type of language. But it's just like, as Paul was saying, not only like websites, it could be language that we use. It could, you know, things that we just repeat ourselves and we go over and over to where eventually it's like part of our nature. It's not wrong for us to do that. And it's, again, that's what Paul is really warning Timothy about, is we can't fall into that trap. You know, we've got to continuously look to the Word of God. There was two things, though, that Paul warns Timothy that is going to be told, that there's stipulations to how you live your life. And so he warns that, and eventually there's going to be some things come out saying that you should or shouldn't do this, but yet there's no wrongfulness to it. And what are those two things in these verses here? Yeah, forbidding people to marry is one. And what's the second one? Yeah. What is it with foods? Have you ever noticed that when you read, especially Romans, I think 1 Corinthians has something in it there. It's all about, there's all this food. You can't eat this food, can't eat that food. You're supposed to eat this food at this time. Why was that such a big deal in the first century? Because you read about foods a lot. Yeah, a lot of ceremonial meetings about eating together. You've got two different cultures that are merging together in the church. You've got the the former Jews, and they've been taught all their life. There's certain foods you can eat, and there's certain foods you can't eat, and so on. Then you've got your pagans, or you could say your Romans, some Greeks, where certain foods you are to offer to your deity, your mythology, your so on, and then you're supposed to eat part of that to honor those gods. So they had to have a lot of questions about that. So again, it's just a lot of things merging together. I'm not sure if it was Byron or if it was Steve talking about the communion, whether it's grape juice or wine, that type of thing. So there was a lot of questions about food, during the first century, and it was basically a combination of a lot of cultures. And so there was, again, going back to, well, this is how I've always done it, and this is the way you're supposed to do it, and so on. So there's a lot of issues there. All right. For time's sake, I'm going to move on, because I think the next two parts are pretty important. Let's look at verses 6 through 11. I really like these verses here. Verses 6 through 11, to me, Paul gets, in education we use the phrase direct instruction, meaning that you don't have all the kind of the implied things. You may look at it this way. These are more direct, here's what you got to do type of instruction. So I kind of feel like the next few verses are kind of like that with Paul and Timothy. So could I have someone read verses 6 through 11 of 1 Timothy chapter 4? All right. So, what is Timothy to reject? Direct instruction. Timothy, you need to reject these things. What are they? Irreverent and silly myths. Old wives' fables and so on. What are those? You could say specifics, or you could say a generic answer to that.
My grandmother, as I was a teenager, one time she told me about, I guess she was concerned who I was hanging out with.
Mm-hmm.
She said, just remember what it says in the Bible. This is Jasper's mama. She said, birds of a feather flock together. I looked that up for years. That isn't in the Bible. The idea is a good idea.
Yes.
But, she just told me, birds of a feather.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Is it idleness is the devil's workshop? Is that another or something like that? I looked this up and I never got a clear understanding as to kind of what exactly Paul was referring to here. One commentator said that Paul was not going to mention it because then he would almost be putting emphasis on what he was trying to take emphasis off of. Some people go back to, you look at Greek or Roman mythology, of the God that pulls the chariot across, pulls the sun with his chariot across the sky. That's something like that. So there was a lot of, if you look at Greek mythology, things like that. But do we get caught up in that today? With fables and old wives' tales? Yes, sir. Okay, fake news.
It's basically unverified information or accusation.
Yeah.
And there's not no fact check.
Yeah.
Meaningless verbiage.
Yeah, chatter.
Assault or whatever that.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe gossip.
Gossip can. I think your example is a good one because, especially here in Tennessee, we have a lot of sayings and it's. I don't know if it's rooted in old wives' tales, but there are certain rules. I'm gonna say that a lot of people follow that you almost. For instance, when do you plant potatoes? Okay, there's certain rules that people live by. You don't plant them before like March 15th, or you don't plant them before the first day of spring. My dad always had a rule; he never planted them until after Easter. But again, we can fall into things like that and almost make it biblical. I think the Pharisees kind of did that with a lot of their teachings. They would create this, out of this certain rule, they would create other rules. And if you violated those rules they created, they were saying you were committing sin. And Jesus was like, it's kind of like on the Sabbath when he healed the gentleman. And he's like, how many of you, you're not supposed to work, you're getting on to me for healing somebody, for doing good, but yet if your donkey or sheep, I'm not sure the example he gave, if it falls into a ditch, or do you not go and pull it out? So, why are you getting on to me for healing this man's hand? So, they created these rules, and sometimes we fall under these old wives' tales, these fables that we have heard all these years, and we think they're gospel, as we say. Yeah.
Before the church, the process of trying to accommodate countries and different cultures, they picked up seasons of the year, certain things that occurred in the year, and pulled them into the church in order to try to compromise and shift.
Yeah.
I think that's the primary example of where we're bringing in certain earthly, mythical things that shouldn't be a part of the church.
Yeah.
And as you said, that's the astrology part.
Right. Yeah.
Pulling away from that.
Yeah. I think so. There's like, if a black cat crossed your path, and bad luck, and if you walk under a ladder, if you break a mirror, there's so many things that we kind of have fallen under. But again, it's those type of things, I think, to the extreme of those type of examples. Again, going into astrology and things like that, that we need to make sure doesn't creep into the church. What does he mean by this term? Yes, verse 7. Exercise yourself toward godliness. And we all know what exercise is because, a lot of us try to avoid that. So what does it mean to exercise toward godliness? Verse 7. That's true. Very true. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that's a very good point.
Our coaches will tell you, you're going to play like you practice.
That's very true. Yeah.
Nobody likes to practice. They love to play the game.
Right. Yeah.
I don't want to practice.
Yep. That's a good point too. So discipline, practicing. Yeah. True. Yep. Very true. Very, very true. Yes. It's what? Okay. Yeah. That's another. Yeah. Yeah. I'm not sure who was it. Okay.
No, just knowing what's in the scripture is different than living.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I know how to
Yeah.
way to walk or to
Right.
or to think.
Correct.
There's a difference.
Yes. Yes. And I think he's going to tell Timothy that too, because he does talk about conduct, not just word, but also conduct. We'll get into that here in just a little bit. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
Back to verse 14, it said, these things I write unto you, not tarry long, but thou mayest know how thou ought to behave thyself,
Mm-hmm.
and how truth.
Yep.
So, what did I discuss? How you should conduct yourself. Things he had written. Live
Mm-hmm.
that way.
Yep.
And he said, without controversy, great is the mystery of godliness. Once again, there's your two words,
Mm-hmm.
but it goes back to what he said.
Yeah.
What I've written to you, hold fast, and you will
Yeah.
live right.
Mhm. Very much. Very good. Absolutely. Absolutely. Last part of this, verse 11. What are the things, so verse 11, these things, or command and teach. So what are those things? In summation. Verse 10, okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's what we're to teach. That's what we're to command. I mean, it's basically as we are with each other, as we are together as Christians, you know, that's what we are to do for each other, is that we talk about the hope that we have, that we talk about how Jesus is the Savior of all, and for those who believe. You could also go back to, you know, I separated these two sections. We could go back to warning of the apostasy, warning of these falling away that's going to come. You could also go back to rejecting profane and old wives' tales. Talk about exercising toward godliness. You know, so I don't want to just limit it to just this section that I had you read. I mean, this is a kind of a continuation of what we are to do. So again, these verses, as I read them, feel like they're a little bit more direct instruction to Timothy, not just kind of an overarching, here's what, you know, the church conduct is. But this is directly to you. Yes?
Basically, all these things counter how
That's true, yeah.
and stating here that
Mhm.
saying that you're going to live direction, trust and truth
Yeah.
is still around you,
Mm-hmm.
and also realize you're going to be reproached
Mm-hmm.
publicly.
Yep, that's true. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Finally, results.
very true. All right. All right, let's finish this out. Verses 12 through 16. This is going to take, I got a couple of points I want to go out before we are all dismissed. So who would like to read verses 12 through 16? 1 Timothy chapter 4.
Let no one despise you for your youth, as believers of love, purity. Till I come and devote yourselves to not neglect the
There's a lot in here I want to talk about in the next 13 minutes or so. The question I have is this: can someone despise someone's youth? And then the follow-up, is that something we need to be mindful of when dealing with those who are younger in the church today? Okay. So how, because, he is telling Timothy, let no one deceive you. So what are some examples of that could have occurred? Both, and we could use either both then or even today.
Because people are young.
Mm-hmm.
You haven't lived your life. Disregard anything they say. That is very discouraging. If and when that happens to you. Because you think things a little differently.
Yeah.
So it's not a means to discourage them. Maybe a teachable moment, as we say.
Right. Yeah.
But not to discourage them.
Okay. Yeah. So not dismissing immediately their thoughts or how they perceive things, kind of deal.
Good to be young. We should be like their children because they have the skill and the enthusiasm, desire to do things the right way. We try to even good. Well, it may work for them, but it'll never work for me. But
Yeah.
it can work for me, even though I'm old and gray. I've got, look to the example
Yeah.
and build off of what they're trying to show you.
Yeah.
Yeah, you really can live this way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good point. Yeah. Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 Yeah, very much. You, especially when things are new, you can automatically dismiss that information, and again, that could really lead to a lot of discouragement. So, yeah, Paul's kind of letting him know there's going to be people that's not going to listen to you, and they're going to. And despise is a pretty hard word. When you think about it, you can not like something. Some of y'all may not like broccoli or some sort of food, but to despise it, it's like, I don't even want to have it in the house, kind of deal. And so Timothy's been warned that that could happen to him as a young person in all this.
Kind of follows this up with, here's what
Mm-hmm.
you can do.
Yes,
It's not about everything you say.
there is. Yeah. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, as a financial, yeah. It was impacting their finances, yeah. Just like the girl that was like a fortune teller, and he told them, the demon, she kind of irritated Paul because the demon kept saying, here's Paul. Anyway, all right, moving on. So, Paul then, as Al was saying, yeah, there's going to be people that's going to just despise you, but here's what you need. Here's what you need to do. Okay? And I want to kind of go through these very quickly. So it says, be an example to the believers in word. So how is that done? All right, practice what you preach. Speak the truth. Speak the doctrine that's been given to you. Yeah. Second one's conduct. What does that mean? Be an example in conduct. Walk the walk, yeah. Walk the walk. Example in love. What does that mean? Be an example in love.
Already know it all, got it all together. So the patience and love to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That can be very
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's like the caring and the patience, and just because you love them, you do those
love
things.
enough to not let them stay there.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
About it, this is where we really would want
Mm-hmm.
to be.
Yeah.
They were out night, but other would be patient.
Right. Or as they're maturing. Yeah. Yeah. Very good. Yeah.
I think you can preach not very kind, but our church time.
Mm-hmm.
We're right all the time, and we want y'all to know it.
Yeah.
Wasn't
Yeah.
very kind.
Yeah. I seem like I can remember that. Spirit. What does it mean by spirit? How are you an example in spirit? Faith. Okay. Yeah. I've only got like 3 minutes. I really want to get to this last one. So your homework is to think about examples of faith and purity. Okay. In verse 15, it says to meditate on these and to give yourself entirely, or immerse, I think was the word that you used, Paul. What is he supposed to meditate on and immerse himself in? Okay. Give attention to, yeah. Give it, yeah. So again, what he's telling Timothy, and I think we need to kind of look at it as internal too. These are the things, Timothy, that my son in the gospel. Here's what you need to meditate. You need to immerse yourself, give yourself entirely to these things, and go back and read those two verses there, 13 and 14. Reading to exhortation, the doctrine. And then it says, you've been given this gift, so you need to make sure